Good afternoon, and welcome to today's Fireside Chat. My name is Patrick Gall, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Technology Security Coalition, the only organization exclusively focused on representing the voice of the Chief Information Security Officer in Washington, D.C. Today, we are going to explore a recently released book by Raj Badhwar, NTSC board member and Senior Vice President and Global Chief Information Security Officer at Voya Financial. The book is entitled The CISO's Next Frontier, AI, Post-Quantum Cryptography, and Advanced Security Paradigms. That's a lot in one title. Joining Raj today is Seth Ryan, the managing partner of Collective Insights, a management and technology consulting firm headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. Seth is a member of the NTSC's Advisory Council, and Collective Insights is a platinum underwriter of the NTSC, for which we are deeply grateful. Quick housekeeping note, we will be setting aside some time towards the end of this session for Q&A. So if you have a question, please enter it into the chat function or raise your hand when we get ready to do Q&A. Seth and Raj, I am delighted to welcome you both to this Fireside Chat and look forward to hearing more about the book and Raj, your journey in writing it. Seth, over to you.
Great, thank you, Patrick. Raj, thank you for joining me today. Really appreciate it. Excited to talk to you about a variety of topics. In our conversations before this and conversing with other CISOs, maybe one place that I'd like to start that maybe some folks on the call would be interested in is, how did you go through the process of writing not only this book, but the next one that's been released that I'm sure we'll touch on later in the call, and how did you balance that with your regular CISO duties, which we understand are often 24/7?
Thank you, Seth. Happy to be here, and thank you for the quick intro, Patrick. So I think, Seth, that is a question that has been asked before as well, right? So I wanted to do a quick additional intro, and that'll probably help stage the answer a little bit better. So I've been in the cybersecurity world for a long time, like 26, 27 years now. And, before my stint at Voya, I've been here for about 3.5 years, I've been, at some very large firms like Bank of America or AIG or BAE. And I really learned my art, of cybersecurity as an engineer at AOL. 10 years there, right? As AOL went through its various cycles of acquisitions and divestitures and otherwise, right? So I did do that. And as part of that journey, really, I got a lot of hands-on, expertise in almost every area of security that I have covered in the book, right? So a lot that has gone into the book is really drawing from my own personal experience, right? As an engineer, as an architect, as an implementer, administrator, and leader and manager, right? And as part of that journey, I did file 14 patents. I did a lot of classified work as a DoD contractor, right? I was an engineering authority for one of the, ecosystem firms in the DoD world, right? So I kind of sort of learned a lot, and I really wanted to get that out to the community based on what I've experienced, right? So that's, I think, all the traditional security paradigms in the book, right? So all the network security, data security, application, cloud security and otherwise, right? Policy writing. And then there are some areas which I really am an ardent follower and practitioner and researcher of, which is primarily post-quantum cryptography and artificial intelligence, right? So I think all of them came together in this book. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is, for me has been really the catalyst was the pandemic. So, I mean, for the last 3.5, 4 years when I lived in the New York City area, I was spending at least 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours every day commuting to work. And when the pandemic happened and when we all started working remotely, I actually stopped doing that. So I made a promise to myself that I would spend that 2.5, 3 hours every day doing something fruitful and not listening to music or something else. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I wanted to at least get that productive time in. So I actually religiously started writing during those hours that I were saved in the evenings. And then, also with the pandemic, we didn't really do anything much for last Thanksgiving or Christmas, to be very frank. So I used all of those holidays to really do a majority of the writing. So I think that is really how, the book came about. And a quick note about the second book really follows my journey as a leader, the challenges that I faced, that I basically put that in writing as well.
Wonderful, and I appreciate it. And thank you for you sacrificing those hours outside of your regular job to put this together, because it is an excellent book. That I've enjoyed reading, and you do cover a lot of topics. To your point, from anything from obviously what the title says around post-quantum cryptography and advanced security paradigms. You talk about remote work and remote access. We talk about network security. You even touch on Bitcoin, right? Being in the financial services world. So really, I enjoyed the book because it does go deep in certain areas where people who have that capability and want that knowledge, they can go. Also, it does bubble it up in short form in what you call the CISO's take, right? What does the CISO need to know in a very short snippet of information around the topic that you're talking about in that particular chapter? But get back to the idea that you're covering a lot of topics. For you and your job as the CISO, the global CISO for Voya Financial, what are the things today, currently, that really keep you up at night? What are the things that you are worrying about for your company, your employees, and the business overall?
Right, I think that is a great question, and and it's not one thing, to be very frank, right? I mean, we have, as you know, we CISOs fight on various fronts. Right, so there are a few things that I can mention. One thing is, that keeps us CISOs and me up at night is advanced malware, right? So whether it is polymorphic or metamorphic malware, what we call as AET, right? Which a malware that uses advanced evasion techniques, right? And like one of the manifestation of that has been ransomware, the various strains of ransomware, right? So that obviously worries us, worries me. We have taken all the preventative measures, right? Defense in depth, zero trust, and all that stuff that we have tried to improve our journey, right? And to secure our systems, our networks, and otherwise. So that's one area that's definitely worries me. The other area is, the growing third-party and supply chain risk, which is again as you all, the whole world came to know about that with SolarWinds. So that worries us, CISOs quite a bit. Right, and all of this supply chain risk leads to secondary risks, right, which is data exfil or unauthorized access to our sensitive data, basically leading to loss of business or loss of reputation or regulatory risk even, right? So those things certainly gives us some sleepless nights. And also, two other things. One is all of us are in our respective cloud migration journeys, right? I mean, you name one company that isn't doing so, right? So the fear is that sometimes the firms, to get to the agility, the capability the cloud gives, right, for them to be successful in the business that they are running, they speed it up. And sometimes the speeding up of that thing may lead to insecure implementations or migrations to the cloud, right? So that worries us CISOs quite a bit, making sure that as we do that journey, right, in our respective areas, respective firms, we do implement a secure cloud operating model, right? We follow that model. And then a lot of the times, CISOs are instrumental, and security teams, in creating that model. We have done that creation, at where I am. But, we just want to make sure that the various manifestations of the cloud, that the infrastructure as a service use, the SaaS use, the PaaS use, the multi-cloud use, the cloud federation, right? It sometimes, there's a lot going on. And so that does create problems. And as it is evidenced by various breaches or exposures of data, right? That if you open any Washington Post or you open the Wall Street Journal, you'll see some of those mentions, right? And last but not the least, the trend that I have seen evolving is DDoS. And earlier DDoS used to be hacktivism, right? That you could see it, or DDoS potentially was used as a facade to launch other attacks, right? But now I'm seeing a trend where DDoS is actually becoming an extortion vehicle. Well, people are actually launching DDoS attacks and then obviously following that with a ransom note saying, hey, how was that? You were down for 10 minutes and we can make it 1 hour until you pay this ransom, right? So that is also going on, which obviously worries us a lot.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you for that answer. And on the topic of supply chain risk, how are you working, inside of your company with other CISOs and with your vendors to address that risk?
I have a couple of points to discuss on that subject, right? One is that, like we have to hit from various sides to manage this risk better, right? Supply chain, third-party risk. One is that we have to work together with the suppliers as well as ourselves is to really harden our software development processes, right? We really have to put the sec in the DevOps. So whether it is a supplier developing code for us, or whether it is a supplier or vendor that gives us libraries or binaries, all right, or whether it's our own team, we really have to make sure that the process of that code development is really hardened so that any malware that can get in, backdoors that can get in, right, is actually detected and prevented. So I think the mission there is to prevent any kind of dependency or namespace confusion attacks, because that's how the SolarWinds people were able to get breached. Obviously, unbeknownst to them, the malware folks were able to get in, the attackers, right? Using basically dependency and a namespace confusion attacks, where you have libraries that you're pulling down from GitHub and God knows where else, right? And you're doing those builds. And if you don't have that hardened, then that's where bad things can happen. So that's one area. The other area is we really now, as security firm, teams and organizations really need to invest in dynamic analysis, which another name for sandboxing and heuristical analysis, right? So we have to be able to do dynamic analysis as we are either doing builds or as we are getting updates or data is being transferred from our third parties or otherwise, depending the case may be, right? And I follow-on capabilities like, for example, I'm going to throw some buzzwords in there, like DNS tunneling, because DNS is really the key to a lot of these supply chain attacks, which can then, go back out to the dark web or a command and control server, right? Or even have like DNS tunneling together with kill switches. So I think that is something that we really need to invest in, and it's not, by the way, easy to do, right? Another area is, again, a buzzword, but really, it depends on the implementation. We really need to focus on our zero trust journeys, right? And it's not as a tool, but as a process, as a paradigm, right? How can we make sure that we have zero trust implemented? Basically least privilege based access should be provided, multi-factor authentication, encryption. I mean, the various paradigms that come in with zero trust, better managing our identities, whether it's a partner identity, employee identity, customer identity, right? So making sure that all of those are done properly. And last but not the least is vendor assessments. We have to be able to assess our vendors and reassess our vendors, right, based on what we know about them and what others may know about them, right? So like through threat intelligence. So we should buy threat intel or have our own threat intel platforms to figure out that if a vendor is breached or if they've had unhygienic behaviors, right, then how can we find out about it through various channels? So I think that I've thrown some points there that should give you an idea as to how best we could probably try to manage this risk.
Absolutely. I think the point that you make about not just assessment of the vendor, but reassessment of the vendor, that is often undone. Right? There's a 1-point check, and then from there, you just kind of assume that if they were secure once or compliant once, that they will remain that way. So that's a great point. Going back to the title of the book and how you start the book, and concerning post-quantum cryptography and quantum computing, it has a potential for creating significant security risk. So without going too much into the technology, because I think people should read the book for that and do their research. But what would be your guidance for other CISOs and security professionals to get ahead of what is emerging in the quantum space?
Yes, I'm gonna give us a slightly longer answer on this, but hopefully I can do it faster. So
Okay.
my recommendation is, right, that this risk deserves further attention, right? At the moment, this is a small risk, right? But because the quantum computing is really at its infancy, it's dawning on us, right? But this could become a medium risk in the next 2 to 5 years as we have, semi-powerful quantum computers show up on the horizon. And then this has the potential to become an existential threat to our security, right? So I think we should definitely make sure we put some more attention on it than what we are doing together as a community, right? And taking a step back just for 2 minutes, right? Like just like the transistor-based computers of today, right? Where basically the computing power is really devised or calculated by the number of binary states that that you could have in your register inside your CPU. So if you have 64-bit registers, right? So basically, the number of states you can have is 2 raised to n at any given instance. The quantum computer, on the other hand, has something called a qubit, and its power is also 2 raised to n quantum bits, or 2 raised to n states, or binary states, or quantum states as we call it there. The difference between the two is that the quantum computer, has the capability of having all these 2 raised to n states simultaneously, whereas the transistor-based is at any given instance. So that gives the quantum computer an immense amount of theoretical computing power, right? So the quantum computer, they are very good at solving difficult problems that we think, like our current cryptography uses. Like, for example, if you look at our RSA, encryption algorithm, basically it is focused on factoring semi-primes, right? Factoring a prime into 2 large semi-primes, and that is basically a computationally difficult thing to do. It could take 1 billion years to actually break that, right? Using current, traditional computers. So basically making it a class NP problem, which is something called as a non-deterministic polynomial time. So it takes basically an infinite amount of time to break RSA. But the quantum computer can make that into a class P problem, which is basically deterministic polynomial time or infinite time. I think that's the risk that we all take. So that's why I think this deserves some attention. I mean, we don't have to rush right now. All we can do right now is that today, as we are improving on our crypto systems, right, our cryptography, we need to make sure that maybe we use some opportunities to make some of them better. So the 2 terms I'm going to introduce here is quantum resistant and quantum safe. So we have the opportunity right now to make our crypto systems quantum resistant, right? We could consider things like elliptic curve cryptography, also known as ECC, using concepts of PFS, or also known as perfect forward secrecy. We can do that today, right? And the manifestation of that has been with Diffie-Hellman. So like we could start using Diffie-Hellman in our PKI, in our various other existing implementations. One such commonly used algorithm is ECDHE, which is elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman ephemeral. Ephemeral, I'm sorry. And the other one is like something called, we call it SIDH, which is super singular isogeny Diffie-Hellman, right? Which is the isogeny of, super singular elliptic curves. So these things are available today. What we have done, at least in the ecosystem that I have, is that I have taken that opportunity at hand, right? So what we have done is, when we have been upgrading some of our CAs, we have now created dual roots. So I have 2 roots. I have a traditional algorithm root, right, without telling what it is. But I have also implemented another root, which is a quantum resistant algorithm. So if RSA were to get breached, or whatever is a traditional root were to get breached tomorrow, I have the capability of actually launching all the certificates again for all of our machine identities or other identities or self-signed certificates with a quantum resistant algorithm today if we wanted to, right? So this just happened because we were able to spend a little bit more energy and made some of our improvements thinking about the future, right? And obviously, this is also very secure. One example, one analogy I can give is, to explain this better, is baseball. So, right, a quantum computer is a fastball here, right? So if you throw it a fastball, it's going to hit it. And so 2 ways to defeat that batsman is, you could throw it an even faster ball, or you could throw it a curveball, right? So some of the enhancements we can do right now are in the category of throwing fastballs. So for example, we can improve our existing algorithms, right? Make it harder, throw a little faster ball, 110 miles per hour, maybe instead of the 95 miles, right? We could do something like a technique that we use in cryptography is something called cascade ciphering, where we could re-encrypt the encrypted data with a different algorithm and the different initialization vector. Well, that's another way of throwing another fastball, right? So we could make it difficult for the quantum computer to actually do the computationally intense calculation, because it's a champ at that. We could also do some things like, for example, increase the number of bits for keys, like AES 256. We could probably do AES 376 or AES 512. Now, at the moment, it's really not supported, but we could probably do it if we wanted to. You can also increase the number of iterations that all, as we call them in cryptography, rounds. So AES 256 has 14 rounds of computation. We could probably make it 28. Again, another fastball, 120 miles per hour, right? But then we could probably also throw some curveballs, right? And the curveballs are the post-quantum cryptography, which is in the book if you read about it. That's where the quantum computer cannot hit that ball, right? And that's what I think we will eventually have to get to.
Right. That's a great answer. I think it's what I take from that is the time is now to really start being educated, right, and understanding, really what the threats are, right? Because existential threat is what I picked up from your answer, right? And if it's not something that can be waited on to get smart or start to prepare for, and also tying it back to supply chain. Right, the vendors that all of the CISOs have, the suppliers, right, pushing down on them as a part of the conversation around supply chain risk, what they need to be looking at ahead of time. So, because again, just securing one environment, in a multi-environment connected world, won't necessarily provide security that we're looking for against that existential threat. So thank you for spending the time on that, and I absolutely recommend to anybody on the call that they go and read these sections of the book to get more acquainted with all the details of which Raj is talking. So, as we kind of go through this, you talked about artificial intelligence in your book. It's probably a good next segue to make here. With the emergence of AI, how does your job and the jobs of the people on your team or in your environment, how do they change in the near term and the long term, and how do you prepare for that?
Right, I think that is a great question. And so for the record, I think like AI, as it applies to our field, which is cybersecurity or IT, is really primarily called machine learning, right? So machine learning is like a subsection of artificial intelligence, quote unquote, right? So as we delve into AI, right, or ML, as we go from the current prevalent AI forms of which is basically supervised machine learning, as we go to semi-supervised or reinforced machine learning, ultimately getting to unsupervised machine learning, as we get into that journey, right, we can really solve some of the problems that we have today, right? For example, we can automate a lot of the mundane or manual tasks. We can also use AI to really do sophisticated detection. Detection that we can't do either because it's too complex, it's too fast, right? So our manual processes sometimes cannot detect that. And the impact on employees is, I think the threats, as you all know, are increasing, exponentially, and we cannot keep hiring people at the rate that the threats are increasing. So I really don't see an impact on the hiring. I think we will sustain our hiring levels. We will just get a lot more sophisticated. We will be delegating a lot of the basic stuff, manual stuff, into artificially intelligent cyber response systems, right? And we will focusing a lot more on the sophisticated piece. I think cybersecurity engineer or the responder of the future is really going to be a data scientist as we get into this whole AI-driven ecosystem, right? So I think that it is going to have a profound impact on us, but I think in a good way, right? So, and as we eliminate all the false positives and the false negatives that really plague some of these artificially intelligent paradigms today, the ML paradigms today, we were going to have to weed them out, right? So I think that net, it is going to have a very good, positive impact. But some of the things that we should also keep in mind is that, as we build these artificially intelligent cyber response systems, reactive response systems, we have to really make sure that we do it right. So like we need to make sure that we have capabilities for algorithmic transparency or accountability of these algorithms, right? We need to factor them in right now. So in the book, like I talk about the code of ethics. Eventually, this thing needs to have its own code of ethics that drives how innovation happens in this space and how this is adopted and how it actually works on a day-to-day basis, right? The other problems is that as we get into this kind of artificially intelligent paradigm, there are other concerns we have to really mitigate now. Start thinking about it now. So for example, we have to remove any biases because these algorithms, we may call them artificially intelligent, but basically they are machine learning, right? So they are as intelligent as the data that is used to train them, right? In the supervised world, and then as they go into an unsupervised world, the basis of their intelligence is still the data, the training data sets, right? So we have to make sure that there aren't any biases in that, because if the algorithm gets biased, then it's very problematic for us, right? Because in an AI system, it's very difficult to validate the action that it took. Because if it's taking lots of actions, it's blocking stuff, it's dropping connections, it's closing incidents, it's shutting down systems, it's responding to attacks. If it's doing a lot of things in machine speed, it's difficult for us cybersecurity people to actually validate each and every action, right? And some of the actions may not be actually accurate, right? So I think we have to start thinking about those problems now. How are we going to do that? How are we going to bring contextual awareness to these AI systems, as in the cybersecurity kind of context as well? How are we going to do that? And last not the least, I think how are we going to build these ethical guardrails? So I think that is something that we have to worry about. The last thing I'll mention on that is that, well, as we get more sophisticated in our incident response, in our engineering, in our operations, bringing these artificial intelligence paradigms in, the attackers are not going to just sit there idle, right? So they are also going to use these constructs to attack us. And that's what we have to worry about, because again, it's all about the training data sets. So if the attacker can actually poison the data that you use to train your algorithms, well, then it can actually go amok, right? It can go haywire. And similarly, like, for example, these days, there is this concept of GANs, or generative adversarial networks, that actually are being designed to attack artificial intelligence paradigms, right? So I think we have to be aware of that. But having said that, net is that this is going to have a profound impact on cybersecurity, and in a positive manner.
I think so as well, and I think you bring up a good point, right? We have to keep ethics in mind while also considering that the folks that we're protecting our systems and our data from, that they may not actually, build ethics into what they're using to attack us. So another topic, I think, for CISOs and security professionals to start looking at now and getting smart around. So to throw a bit of a curveball to you and take us off of the topic of some of the technology and stay kind of in, personnel and human capital. Right now, I think many of us are seeing, and there certainly have been some trends out there around, the job market, the career marketplace, and, what people are calling the Great Resignation. Considering that people are changing jobs and maybe going to things that they want to do versus things that they thought that they had to do, or moving into fields that they didn't previously have experience. How do you view your role in the cybersecurity, the CISO role in our community? How do we help solve for the shortage that is currently here and will only get worse as we have to mature to protect ourselves against some of these threats? What's our role in solving this shortage of good folks in information security?
I think that is a very important question, given what's going on in the ecosystem right now, right? So we've been lucky that our attrition rates haven't been that high, but net is that the pandemic was the catalyst for this, and the proof is in the pudding, right? I mean, as you see, huge amounts of resignations or job loss or movement of folks, right? And that has obviously caused consternation and risk, especially as a cybersecurity professional, right? Some of the points that I can make on this is, like, one thing is that what I try to do with my team, and even within the firm, to everybody who is in the firm, not just cybersecurity people, is to really talk about the mission, right? So, like, drawing from what I learned during my days, working as a DoD contractor or with returning veterans, which I have learned, right? I try to give that knowledge out, is that we have to really talk about, our mission is to protect our customer data, our employee data, our systems, right? And doing that, we also protect the livelihood of thousands of people, right? And that's just one firm. If all of us come together with our own respective missions, right, sometimes that has to transcend the 5 or 10% or 15% hikes that somebody may get, the financial motive why people are leaving, right? So I think that we can do a better job. But the security teams are actually well poised to make that connection with our employees, cybersecurity and otherwise, and talk about the real mission that we all have, the responsibility that we have. So I think that is something that I thought I'd share. The other things are, like, if sometimes, we just cannot keep hiding at the rate the threats are increasing, or at the rate people sometimes may be leaving. So we really have to build ecosystems where we can train the next generation of cybersecurity professionals, right? So like if we can't hire them, we develop them. We have to start thinking about how do we bring in new talent, right? So like engaging universities. I mean, one thing I do is I'm on the advisory board of 3 universities in the New York area. So like Ithaca College, Pace University, Rutgers, with the mission to really go in and actually attract talent. Talk about what we can do, and again talk about the mission. So I think that is something we have to develop. This we can't buy ourselves out of this problem. We cannot. We have to really build that. And last but not the least is from a cybersecurity perspective, is that we really also have to fight for better retention packages for our cybersecurity persons. We really have to do that. As CISOs, we have to do that. So like we have to make sure that every engineer, right, to the manager, to the director, or however our organizations are structured, have retention package capabilities. Generally, if you look in the industry, retentions are really given to senior folks. But what about the engineer that is going to leave tomorrow, right? So we have to really give them the mission, and then we have to protect them because they are protecting us. And if we don't have that bi-directional protection scheme, then obviously this paradigm is going to continue.
Great points. Great points, and I think as we've seen and we've talked about, right, democratizing the access to training and information around a career and what knowledge you need to get to have a successful role in the cybersecurity workforce, I think is incredibly important, right? Making sure that we collaborate as professionals instead of holding back information, right? And I think we've talked about it as a group in the NTSC, and the fact that the folks who are working against us to steal or damage or harm are highly paid, and they're highly collaborative, and we need to be able to do both of those things here so that we are better at protecting and detecting, responding. Last question before I think we can get to Q&A here. When it comes to the workforce and how the workforce has adjusted over the last year and a half to 2 years due to the pandemic and other factors, work from home techniques and capabilities have been implemented. Are there any new techniques that we should also consider while we continue to operate in this hybrid remote work paradigm, considering that it may not change anytime soon?
Right. I think, and first of all, kudos to all the cybersecurity professionals, right? I mean, the entire planet really was working from home, and very little disruption of business, right? I mean, there have been revenue losses, and I get that, but look at this, it could have been a catastrophic for us, and it was not. So at least some credit needs to go to the security people, right? As we have all come together to really make this happen, right? So we use traditional paradigms like VPN and VDI and end-to-end encryption and multi-factor authentication and all the other things, right? We have either had them implemented or improved upon them. Some other things that we should also consider doing are the concepts of dynamic host checking. So like anytime a host, whether it's a mobile device, it's a laptop, it's an iPad, it's a whatever, right, is trying to connect into an ecosystem, whether a network or an application ecosystem, otherwise, a dynamic check needs to be conducted on the host itself to make sure that it is actually going to comply with our security paradigm, our security requirements. So it doesn't have malware on it, it has all the patching up to date, and any kind of, it can also do a behavioral analysis, not only of the user, but of the system itself, right? The processes that are running on it. So I think there are some good implementations that are out there now where you can actually dynamically assess a host as it is coming on, and if it actually fails the check, you can actually tell them, hey, A1, 2, 3, these are the things you should consider doing, deploy this, redirect them. If they are behind on their Microsoft patching, maybe they deploy that, right? So I think that is proven to be pretty useful. The last thing in that area I would like to stress upon folks is that, do a little bit more than what you may already be doing about dark web monitoring, because there is obviously a little bit heightened risk of data exfiltration when everybody's working at home. People can take pictures, right? I mean, they may not be able to print stuff because we may have restrictions and otherwise, right? But they can definitely take pictures. And a lot of the times, some of this data collectively together can end up on the dark web, right? So we all need to do a better job of figuring out, data for our employees, our customers, or even our partners, because we have to really do this together in the ecosystem. We have to have visibility to that, and we have to have capability to alert, our folks on that. So I think we need to think about that. And it requires a little bit of investment, a little bit of effort into the whole threat intelligence build out of our ecosystem, and dark web monitoring is part of that.
Absolutely, it makes sense, and I like what you said about what I would call endpoint posture checking, right? Real time. It's a key ingredient of a zero trust approach. I think most CISOs and most security professionals have kind of figured out the identity side and proofing the identity with multi-factor risk-based authentication and how to encrypt workloads and data in transit, but making sure that you check that endpoint that's being used to access that information and doing that at the time that it's being used to access, versus just deploying a cert one time and then trusting that it's secure from that point. That seems to be an area that a lot of folks are struggling. So appreciate your views on that.
One quick comment I wanted to make on that is that people think that VDI is very secure, but I came across a malware called Squirt Danger, which is actually what it does is it takes pictures, snapshots of your screen every a second. You can configure it actually, the malware can configure itself and start shipping it to the dark web. So defeating VDI, which is actually people thought was very secure, right? So I think that's why, malware folks are very smart. I mean, they are pretty sophisticated folks, and this is a business for them.
Yes.
Right. This is not just for for giggles. This is actually they're making billions of dollars. A total amount of money lost, was actually $1 trillion now, per a report from McAfee with a T. So I think that's why we have to really get better in our defenses as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. And I think at this point, we're right at time to open it up for Q&A. And Raj, I appreciate you taking my questions. And again, before we go and answer some questions from the group, I want to recommend that everyone, take a look at Raj's book, The CISO's Next Frontier, and certainly the other book that is now out, I believe, which is The CISO's Transformation. With that, I think we can kind of go over and take a couple of questions. The first one that I see here is that phishing continues to be the top vector for many attacks, despite how much visibility that there is around the approach. How do you guard against phishing attacks, not from the technical perspective, but rather from the human perspective?
Yeah, I think that we can implement all the technology we want, right? All the sandboxing and behavior analysis and all the other things, right? But the thing is, the weakest link is the human, the user, and therefore we have to really do a better job of training them, and not actually pointing fingers at them or doing blame games with them. We just have to train them better. So if they get phished, I think part of the responsibility also is on the security team to make sure that they have to really make it interesting for them to really learn about this stuff, right? And have the awareness campaigns for them. So I think that's what I think we have to come together, figure out the better ways of doing the awareness so that they are the best line of defense for us against this. And technology can always be that. We will block 99.5% of the malware and the phishing emails and the spoof and the spoofing emails and spam, right? But the 0.5 that will get in is that, and that can do that damage, right? You just need one click, right? I mean, if you ask Equifax, one click and boom. So I think that's what we have to use. Our training really has to be of very good quality, and we have to have the engagement of our users.
Absolutely. I think that's a good point. And I've heard other CISOs talk about partnering with their human capital or human resources folks to make this part of the job description for hiring new people across the business and across different types of roles. I'm going to go back to another question around supply chain and supply chain risk. What does an organization need to do to understand the probability of disruptions, especially given firms with good security rating scores that are also being successfully attacked? Good question.
I think that is a good question, right? So, because the assessment is only as good as the assessor and the data that is available, right? Because sometimes like the traditional way of doing assessment is question and answers, or even if you do some kind of a little bit more sophistication in there, like for example asking them for their SOC reports or penetration test reports, which is what we try to do, right? That can still leave some gaps. So I think the future again is has to be dynamic analysis of how, and obviously depends on the engagement model, right? What kind of a supply chain are we talking about? The thing is, you can't dynamically assess each and every patch that comes down from Microsoft, right? Patch Tuesday, we have like hundreds of patches coming down. We can't really do the old way when we used to create a gold image and test it. Now a lot of the stuff is moving much faster. Things are auto updating. So the proof is going to be eventually doing this dynamic analysis as the bits are flowing on the wire, right? And looking for patterns, looking for behavior, and it's not going to be easy, right? I mean, easier said than done. Lots of the sophisticated entities like Microsoft and Mandiant couldn't detect SolarWinds, right? In spite of all the claims. So it is not going to be easy, but I think eventually we will have to do better job of using unsupervised or semi-supervised machine learning to detect these things.
Makes a lot of sense. I think that's an evolving space, and we're going to see a lot of innovation there over the next couple of years, considering the size and scale of the breaches that we've had in the last 18 months. So one more question, I guess, from a talent. Again, back to the talent topic. The shortage that has been calculated before the pandemic and is kind of getting further exacerbated by what people are calling the Great Resignation. It seems to be in the more seasoned or experienced team members, maybe kind of middle type of experience, 7 to 9 or 7 to 10 years. But we also have an aging workforce, right? And we see this across industries and across different types of roles. How do we channel, what's the best way and how do we do it to channel new entrants into the workforce, when there seems to be, surplus, but knowing that we're going to need these new entrants down the road because of, kind of mass retirement coming in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is a difficult problem to solve. One thing that I have tried to do is also to, expand the pool of people, right? And, there are lots of I consider IT people to be slightly different than security people. Like security is a specialization over IT. None of them were born security people, right? But we all specialized and we became security professionals, right? So, but there is a pool of people that we can really interest them to join the security teams from IT. They have a lot of experience. Sometimes they just don't want to come and be part of a security team. So I think that's one avenue. The other avenue is better, training and cross training. So, and the thing is that sometimes, you will only learn on the job, right? So there are a lot of interested folks, right? There's a lot of folks graduating colleges. So I think that's what at least what we are trying to do is to make sure that we expand the pool, attract new talent from areas that never really came into security. And then obviously also retention. So the folks with the 7 to 9 years or 10 years that are leaving, how can we retain them? Because a lot of them are leaving either because they are frustrated, right? Or they are leaving because of compensation, right? So how to actually make sure that we have retention packages for them. I think one message I try to give out to folks is that, if the notion that, a cool job or a cool work is in the next job, right? If people have that notion, then it will never be at the current job. You will never be happy at your current job. You always think that, oh, the next job I'm going to be happy, right? So I think that is what the managers really have to sit down with their folks and talk about them is that, what, if you are unhappy doing what you're doing, let's talk about what you want to do, because maybe there are other areas that you could feel a little bit more satisfied, right? So I think that's something that, again, it's some management. We have to really talk to our folks, connect with them. And that's why I think it's this passion of having to know your employees. I think we should be able to predict who is actually a high risk of attrition, right? Who's going to potentially leave, because sometimes, there are always signs. So I think we, you have to shake hands with both hands in this case, and the manager, the security leaders, how see this problem coming.
Right. Now that makes sense. And, I think for us, we're seeing people with maybe not pure technical degrees, but industrial engineers, people with that kind of systems thinking, ability to process engineers, right? Because it's not all technology. It's about systems, and it's about how they work together and the dynamics between those systems. So the retooling of those skill sets or teaching the technical pieces is one area we've talked about, right? And the other one, being that as you move more to the cloud and the cloud operator takes on more of the true IT responsibilities, repurposing some of those folks who were infrastructure managers or operating systems engineers and moving them over to the security side where things are dynamic and changing, are a couple of additional ways to think about that.
So I'm back.
Hey, Patrick.
Hi. What a fascinating conversation. Would have loved to ask some more questions on things we never even got into, like threat intelligence sharing, and where do you see that going? And I would love to explore the talent issue more, because I think most of you saw the announcement by Microsoft a couple of weeks ago where they're investing heavily in something like 1,044 community colleges across the country, creating 25,000 scholarships putting curriculums out there, training the trainer. It's a national campaign to help address the talent shortage, but as the person who asked the question noted, do they have someplace to go when they graduate? Because right now, I think I read in CyberSec that for every entry-level job, there's about 6.10 people for every job. So it's creating some complications at the front end. Seth, Raj, thank you very much. And very much enjoyed the conversation. For those who are listening, we will be posting the video of this conversation in the next couple of days on our website, ntsc.org, in the section called On the Air. And with that, I'm going to thank everyone who joined us today and remind everyone that we will continue to be doing these fireside chats over the remainder of the year. We have 2 more scheduled, and we'll also be doing a number of our in-person events. Happy to be starting doing that next year. On February 16th, we'll start with our first policy roundtable in Atlanta at the Buckhead Club. And again, that's listed on our website. So wish everybody to have a happy afternoon. Seth, Raj, thank you very much. And we'll be seeing you on the next Fireside Chat.